From the Library of Congress in Washington, D.C.
Edward Ayers will kick off the Collections as Data stories with History Between the Lines, thinking about collections as data. Ed is the Tucker-Boatwright Professor of Humanities and the President Emeritus of the University of Richmond. President Barack Obama awarded him the National Humanities Medal in 2013 for his dedication to public history. Over his decades of work, Ed has tried to find new ways to connect people with the American past. Current projects include the Backstory podcast, bunkhistory.org, the American Civil War Museum, and serving as president of the Organization of American Historians. Please welcome Ed Ayers.
Good morning. It's good to see everybody. So, I've been asked to cover several decades of digital stuff since I've been at this for several decades, and you might think I would have had it figured out by now, but I don't, because the frontier keeps moving on us, and it's really exciting to think about where we are and where we've been. And I think the revolution that we're living through now began before the digital, though. I think it actually began, this is a dangerous thing to say in front of people who actually know the truth on this, but there's no Q&A right now, so you can't challenge me for this at this second. I believe that the revolution actually began with the microfilm revolution, the 1930s and the 40s and the 50s, when we unlocked this remarkable technology that will allow us to have all the newspapers in American history, that would have the United States Census, all these bountiful documents available to researchers anywhere for a relatively small cost. And even though microfilm seems distinctly unsexy today, it was my introduction not only to all things digital, but to history itself. I wasn't sure what I wanted to do, even when I was in graduate school. But one day I went into the microfilm room and started reading newspapers on one of those big sort of World War II era gray steel things with the cranks on it. And there in front of me I saw something remarkable. These newspapers demonstrated something that I had not realized. People didn't know what was going to happen the next day. And all this stuff was happening at the same time. That you would see on one page the news I recognized from the textbooks, and then on all the other pages beneath, all kinds of fascinating things, the evolution of life before our very eyes. And I realized that's what I'm interested in, is all that resonance and interaction, that space between the lines, that sense of possibility that was on every screen of that old scratched microfilm on that archaic device. So I wrote my dissertation partly out of that, and when I became a teacher, I said, you know, it would be fun to introduce all these young people to the glories of microfilm. And so I sent them into the microforms room in front of these machines, and they were completely addled. This is in the 80s, and the entire assignment was read a year of this newspaper and write about something interesting in it. And all the pre-meds and people in the class are just freaking out. But what's the assignment? That is the assignment. What's the question? That's for you to find out and to answer it. And the course evaluations would come back into the end of the semester, and they said, well, we didn't like Ayers that much, but seeing history raw was one of the most exciting things that I've done in my college education. So I already knew that magic, that power lay in that medium. Well, one day I was in the library and I saw a gleaming black Next machine in 1990. And I saw that, as amazing as it seemed at that time, that images of microfilm and census and letters and diaries and maps could be seen on a computer screen in color. Now, the web didn't exist yet, but looking at that. So friends of mine in the library told me about a magical thing called SGML. And I was pandering to the librarians in the room. So Standard Generalized Markup Language, or as we called it, sounds good, maybe later. And that we saw in that a way to build something that would identify all these different objects in the collections and connect them with each other. So I had this idea, hey, we have this capacity. What do you say that we share with people who don't have access to a major research library, who don't have a bank of microfilm readers or microfilm, a way to get that excitement for themselves? Now, we didn't have any idea of how we would distribute that, some kind of tape, some kind of hard device. But we started building it. And then one day a friend called me down and said, you need to see this, Ed. Here's something they're calling the World Wide Web, and it's based on a baby version of SGML. We could make what they're calling a site for this World Wide Web pretty quickly. And so we did. And so we were out there at the very beginning before we were ready, before we had really any idea what we were doing. But what we did know is that suddenly, if you had plenty of patience, you could watch an image of a newspaper very slowly appear on your screen over that 240 baud modem, 2400 baud modem. And people liked it. And then the letters and diaries. So we started building a mountain. And we built this first project that many of you may have heard of, the Valley of Shadow. The short version of it is every piece of information about every person who lived in a northern community and a southern community throughout the entire American Civil War. It really does exist. And you see what we did is we emulated an archive. And this was really, really hard to build. It took us 14 years to do it because what we were doing is transcribing by hand 10,000 pages of newspapers. And these convenient things called PDF files didn't exist when we started. So we actually had to write a script to show a group 4 factive compression image to be able to disseminate those. And then many, many thousands of letters and diaries and all this. And this came out in the mid-90s. And then in 2003, I wrote an analog book about it. At the beginning, it says, by the way, this is based entirely on a digital archive that you can see every source that I use. And that came out in 2003. And then I became Dean of Arts and Sciences at UVA, and then I left UVA to become president at Richmond. And when I did, and this is important for all the things that we're talking about today, the University of Virginia, rather than being mad at me, said, wow, we've been happy to oversee in the library the creation of this big thing. What do you say that we make sure that if Ed, say, gives a talk at the Library of Congress in 2017, 10 years from now, that it still works? Or that he writes volume 2 out of the Valley of the Shadow, which I just did at bookstores near you in October. The Thin Light of Freedom. And here's the thing. I sat there and hit on this thing as hard as I could for a year and a half after it hadn't been touched for 7 years, and it still works. That's because of the people at the University of Virginia who went back through and checked every link and made sure it all still works. That's important because sometimes we wonder if the things that we are making in this digital environment are going to endure the way that the things, even microfilm, which I believe is right there with cockroaches in its durability, is it going to endure? So the Valley of the Shadow shows that it can, and I think that's important. But there are other things. When I left Virginia, I said, okay, transcribing by hand an entire intentional archive, that was fun. But what do you say that we take advantage of all the pre-digitized sources that have emerged since 1993 when we started the Valley of Shadow? I bet there are lots of things that we could put to immediate use. When I went to the University of Richmond, I was a part of founding the Digital Scholarship Lab, where we have many new projects, and one of which is American Panorama, which is a digital atlas of American history. And the idea there was, let's take advantage of, say, 2 of these. This is the forced migration of enslaved people, and I really do want to explore it. And what it does is based on the United States Census, which is already in machine-readable form. Let's make a kind of map of the slave trade and the movement of African-American people across the vast expanse of the American South. The idea was to see things that we could not see before, but that were already hidden between the lines of the data. Being able to see the areas of the South that were losing enormous numbers of people and others who were gaining enormous numbers. And we built all this with an open source set of tools that can be shared with other people can make these maps. And I would say that when I say we, I don't literally mean me. I mean my colleagues Rob Nelson, Justin Madron, and Nate Ayers, who made these projects and are tapping into the capacities of collections we already have. The other one that we made was the foreign-born population of the United States from 1850 to 2010. And in this case, to be able to see, okay, that gives you an idea of what it looks like, and we can click on a county, and it will show you all the places that all the people in that place came from in that year. So what you'll see is that we are displaying data in 4 or 5 different ways. And there's it's very slow where the people are coming from, and it will send out tendrils into all these places. Back on the on the forced migration map, we could have clicked one thing and it would have the narratives of people who were swept up in all of this. So here's something, we were able to make a map that got widespread attention from sources that already exist. And we're able to make these with some speed now. And one we had last year, and again, since I didn't make it, I can brag on it, was named one of the 15 top maps in the world by National Geographic about mapping inequality. A collaborative project of Richmond, Johns Hopkins, and the University of Maryland to Virginia Tech to show how it was that segregation became baked in to our culture, and maps of over 150 American cities. We have a new map coming out about urban development that will map all the information, a lot of it here from Washington, about how it was that our cities that we all know, including very small ones, were transformed in the 1960s by building interstates through them and bulldozing substandard housing and all those kinds of things. So all these have the same idea as the Valley of the Shadow. There is all this enormous power within our reach that we can make visible. We've had these numbers about where people came from in all these places every year, but if you can't see it, you don't really know what it possesses. And my dream, too, is that every middle school kid in America will be able to click on her county and see how that has evolved over the course of American history. To see that the United States has always been woven together of people from a broad range of places. The things we're talking about today are just the latest stage in a very long conversation. So with the American Panorama Digital Scholarship Lab, the idea there is kind of the Valley of the Shadow turned wrong side out. Instead of taking an archive that's scattered all around people's attics, neglected, and making it visible, which was a worthy thing to do, what do you say that we take advantage of the enormous resources that have been created in making things machine readable? But I still didn't have the newspapers I was dreaming of. So we're on my computer now. So maybe switch back to the HP and see the network's doing funny things with me here. So can you go back on that and see if we can get Reconstructing Virginia? Yes, we can. So you remember how much trouble it was for people to sit there and read newspapers on microfilm, transcribe from scratch all the articles, write a summary of them. Well, thanks to Chronicling America, there are over 2,000 newspapers and millions of pages that have already been digitized. What could we do with that instead of just sort of reading them in an analog form? Well, using a Mecca from our friends at George Mason and 16 eager first-year students at the University of Richmond, and Virginia Chronicle, which is the Virginia version of Chronicling America, we said, let's go in and make visible to the world the leading newspaper in Virginia during this tumultuous period of Reconstruction. And so, in one semester, using the expertise of Chris Kemp in the library at the University of Richmond, we were able to transcribe, or actually correct, 2,000 pages, 2,000 articles, and you can see what each one of them looks like. And each student took responsibility. For most of the transcription had already been done by OCR, but they needed to be corrected. So they went back in and corrected them, then in sort of a form of crowdsourcing, contributed those back into the archive, making the archive better while using it. And we have elaborate timelines and lots of different ways to see this. Basically, in 3 months, we did probably what would have taken us 3 years back on the Valley of the Shadow by using open source software, things that have already been digitized, existing standards, a plug-in. You see the timeline there is a plug-in for Omeka. We were able, with freshmen, to do something that had been almost impossible just a few years before. We did an installation of this at the Black History Museum in Richmond. We did a preview of that. And so I had these kids showing visitors to the museum what it could do. And we got together the next morning. I said, well, how was that? And they said, they wanted to know if we were graduate students. We said, no, we're 19. And so, it's when we think about what a collective effort to unlock all of the power in these newspapers by looking at them as articles, restoring the article structures and the argument structure, and still a summary, and then synthesizing them into a week. I think that we're just at the beginning of really seeing all that chronicling America can do. So all that's good too, and we're getting ready to do the Richmond Planet this fall, one of the leading African American newspapers around the turn of the century. So I believe I need to go back to the Mac now, if I could. I'm trying to make maximum use of incredible facilities here at the Library of Congress, and I am. So this is what we're working on now. This is something called Bunk, and it's named after the Henry Ford quote that history is more or less bunk. Well, of course, we don't think it is. And he has this other thing. He says, the only history that matters is the history we make today. And what we think, what matters a lot is the history, the writing, and thinking about the history that we're making today. I'm seeing some of you point at the screen. It's awesome. That suggests that we're engaging you already. What is this? We're curating every day all representations of the American past in all media and then putting them in conversation with each other. And this is not quite out yet. This will debut very soon, and we hope that you'll sign up for Bunk Mail, the weekly newsletter. And it's about the same thing that I had the idea back in graduate school in the 1970s. As a matter of fact, you'll see that I've only had one idea in my life, actually, which is, hey, there's cool stuff here. I wish other people could see it. And maybe if I put it right in front of you on your phone, you would. And that the interesting stuff is the connections in between. So what this does, Bunk, is we are tagging all these things as they come out. And you'll say this is from portrait from the Library of Congress, but some of these things are coming from The Atlantic or the Washington Post, but they're also coming from blogs that people wouldn't have seen otherwise, or they're coming from the scholarly literature, or they're coming from newspapers and magazines across the political spectrum that don't talk to each other very much. And they're also coming and making, and here's the point of Bunk, that you realize that there's history all around us. People on airplanes tell me, almost invariably, I'm sitting there grading papers or something, and they say, so, are you a history teacher? I said, yeah. I said, yeah, I always hated history, all those names and dates. And I said, yeah, I know, but that's not what history is. And it's not really that. It's not this test. And they don't realize that we're saturated in representations of the past all the time. So what Bunk is trying to do is to make us realize that most of our movies and television shows, unless they're science fiction, are history, are based on history. Most of our navigating through the complexities of our own time are often looking for historical coordinates. So here's Frederick Douglass as a refugee. And you can see, so that the first link there is about the Civil War, but the next is about other refugees, Anne Frank. And then you can also say, okay, now let's think about what happened to enslaved people after emancipation. Here's a hidden history of Juneteenth. And so this is Greg Downs on Talking Point Memos. So part of my instinct on all this is why it is that there is so much wonderful history being written in so many venues. We've never touched more people with American history than right now. But there's so much of it suddenly in so many forms and so many media that we can't really see it as a whole. So Bunk is trying to do what tried to do with the Valley of the Shadow, try to do with the Digital Scholarship Lab, which is to gather the power in collections and then share them with the world. Now, one of the things about this, you'll see it says share connection. So if you click on the social media button when this is actually available, and of course, I've realized that people are out there with all kinds of laptops now. Who knows? It may be available this very moment for all I know, but I don't mean for it to be. It's going to be so much more awesome pretty soon. But if you collect on the social media or the email, what it says is, look at this cool connection I found on Bunk. It's the two things and the relationship between them. And it's up to you to say, isn't that amazing how Frederick Douglass and Anne Frank, we think of them both as refugees? Or look at this, the conversations all about monuments. What were people saying about this 15 years ago to be able to understand that with some depth? So the idea is that people will be their own curators. We'll tag all this. We describe it as, it's like wrapping each of these entries like a protein. It can connect in lots of different ways. Right? So the Frederick Douglass thing is about African American history, it's about slavery, but it's also about refugees, but it's also about other kinds of connections as well. So the back end that we've built is allowing the students at the University of Richmond to help us tag all these things so they can talk to other kinds of things, so that we can recognize that we live in history the way we live in oxygen, that it is everywhere all the time, and that we can see it in cool new ways. So in many ways, my inspiration through all of this has been a guy named Vannevar Bush, who in 1945 invented a machine that was going to revolutionize everything. And picture this. First of all, you wear a walnut-sized camera on your forehead, and then you have the shutter running down your arm, and when you see something cool, you click it. It takes a picture of it. And you're able to add that archive that you're making with all the archive of microfilm. And he calculates that if you added up the entire written record of humans in 1945, it'd be in the billions, he said, but we could reduce this, just extrapolating a bit from current technologies of microphotography, into a moving van. And the Encyclopedia Britannica, he said, would cost a nickel and would fit on a tiny corner of your desk. And the device that would hold all this together, the Memex, would be a series of microfilm screens that you call up in front of you, and you'd see the connection you wanted to make, then you take a picture of it. And then you would have added to the network of knowledge and information. Well, microfilm, as awesome as it is, did not end up doing all that. Could not foresee, obviously, the invention of the digital technologies that make all that possible. But he imagined in 1945 that there would be a new profession of people who make connections, of people who are trailblazers, he said, who will find all of the excitement and the drama and the meaning in the history between the lines. And that's what we're still trying to do, and I hope all of you will join that exciting adventure. The Library of Congress makes it possible. A lot of these things are based on the treasures that have been saved. I like to think for just this moment and how lucky we are to be at a time where we have whole new ways of envisioning this legacy. So thank you very much and have a great day.
This has been a presentation of the Library of Congress. Visit us at loc.gov.